Back in the 90s when Elina was growing up in Malawi, HIV was burning through the country. There was no hope of a cure, or even treatment. It was the leading cause of death.
We used to sing songs like HIV is a killer. We would sing like AIDS, AIDS, AIDS is a killer, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS is a killer. In books it was written, HIV has no cure, it cannot be cured.
So you can imagine how she must have felt when she learned that she had contracted HIV. It set her on a path from doubting conventional treatment to ultimately believing a cure is in sight, because she saw one with her own eyes. Hello, and welcome to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. I'm your host, Eric Bond. On today's episode, Elina Mwasinga, Hope for a Cure. Join me. By the time Elina showed up on her pastor's doorstep, she was in rough shape.
I feel like I just want to die.
It was her first year of university. She'd just learned that she's HIV positive, and her immunity level was dangerously low. Her lymph nodes were extremely swollen. She was losing weight fast. But she had grown up thinking that HIV is a death sentence. She had heard that the new medicines didn't work. So she was skeptical of what her physician was offering.
So I told the doctor, I'm not starting medication. I don't want to get on meds.
Instead, Elina turned to a traditional remedy. Some health practitioners were touting it as an effective cure.
So at that time in Malawi, there was a herbal medicine called Galani Malawi. And so I started the Galani.
She thought the guarani might be helping, but in reality, she was going downhill fast.
So that also affected me a lot because my appearance changed. And people would start to question like, oh, you have changed. You look sick.
One person who noticed was her pastor. He was an old family friend, and he was concerned. He asked Elina to come in for counseling.
I was lucky that the pastor was a psychiatrist. So he's one of the good counselors, and he also has got a good background in HIV.
Needless to say, there was a lot of bad information, wrong information about HIV floating around back then. And she'd believed a lot of it. Why wouldn't she? So it was good timing when she went to meet with the pastor. He knew his science.
It wasn't about Bible verses, but actually getting me to start medication and telling me the realities of living with HIV.
He didn't lecture or scold. He didn't implore her to take her meds. Instead, he guided her through some questions. So why don't you want to take medication, he asked.
Because by the end of the day, I'm still going to die anyways.
Do you know anyone who is living with HIV, he asked.
I'll be like, yes, I do.
Do you know anyone who has lived with HIV for more than 5 years?
So at times I would say no, and then he'd give me examples. And then he made me understand that first, I'm not alone. And two, it's possible to beat this.
He was the first person to really get through to her.
So it was like a series of conversation asking me questions. But by the end of the day, I was able to reflect and answer myself questions to my own fears.
Finally, Elina had hope. Hope that she would live.
Every time I had those conversations, I started to feel better. And then I realized, I think I can actually take medication. I can actually be okay. So all of those kind of small conversation, but yet big impact, really helped me to get on the right track with my status.
The pastor managed something that Elina's doctor had failed at, convincing her to take her antiretroviral medication. And with that finally settled and her health bouncing back, the pastor got Elina to do something else that had been hard, really think about her future.
And he would ask me about my dreams. And then he told me, your dreams doesn't have to fail because you're positive. And he's the one who told me that I can either let this define me or not.
That was liberating and empowering.
But I still needed the drugs.
The idea of taking powerful drugs for the rest of her life bothered Elina. There were practical reasons. The pills were so big and had side effects. And societal reasons. Being HIV positive came with so much stigma. She had learned that the hard way after her diagnosis. Like many of the people we've met this season, Elina first learned her status almost by accident. Her university required her to take a class called Introduction to HIV.
So when we had the course, people were talking about getting tested, and my friends were like blabbing around how, oh, I got tested, I'm fine. So I was like, oh, maybe I should also go get tested.
But Elina had an uneasy feeling. Maybe she wasn't fine. Two traumatic events from her past came to mind.
When I was 8, I was sexually abused by my uncle. Plus, I used to get sick often when I was a kid. I remember there was a time I needed urgent blood transfusion. So they were just calling in relatives to come and see if they match with my blood group just to donate blood. And this was in early 2000 when I think I got a blood transfusion. And my father said they suspect maybe the blood wasn't clean because people were just coming and give out the blood. HIV wasn't easily talked about, and people weren't really motivated to go for testing.
These two incidents made Elina fear what her HIV test could show. So she decided to get tested off campus for some privacy.
And they told me I'm HIV positive.
Her first thought was to call her boyfriend.
So you know how it is when you're in your first relationship, you feel like, oh, I'm going to marry this person. I told the person I was in relationship at that time that, okay, I went to the hospital, I was found positive, and the person said, oh, okay, I'm going to accept you the way you are, but 2 days later, I tried to call the person, I would feel they're ignoring me, and by the end of the day, the person ended the relationship.
She then turned to her best friend for support and confided in her.
Before I know it, it was all over campus that I'm HIV positive. It was difficult because every time people would look at me or people are laughing, I thought maybe they're talking about me.
Elina felt abandoned. She stopped going to classes. She felt utterly hopeless. That is, until she met with that pastor. He advised her to channel her pain and stigma into positive action.
What do you want to do when you grow up? Do you feel like you can tell another young person living with HIV today that it's going to be okay? I'll be like, yes, I can do that.
She started attending and working with organizations that help young people with HIV. She'd help them, and they'd help her.
And by the end of the day, I think I started to own it, because one thing that motivated me the most was someone said, you can let what's in your blood define you, or you can define yourself. So I told myself that I'm going to give it a challenge. People are laughing at me. People still discriminate. People still call us names. So yeah, it's not easy. But when you disclose, I feel like you get off that burden of hiding. You can put your medication anywhere. You don't have to put them maybe in a plastic bag, hide them in a certain sack. You're just comfortable, and you gain that freedom of just living positively. I want to show them what an HIV positive person can do, and I want to achieve more.
So Elina stopped feeling ashamed of her status and started working with more organizations that help young people going through what she experienced. Ultimately, Elina became one of the most influential people working on HIV in her country. In 2015, the United Nations member states set a goal to eliminate AIDS by 2030. That would mean that virtually everyone living with HIV across the globe would receive treatment to prevent them from getting sick or from dying. While Elina worked to make sure that young people in Malawi were tested and on treatment, something happened that completely changed her view of what might be possible in her lifetime. She learned about a guy on the other side of the planet named Paul.
Well, my name is Paul Edmonds. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Palm Springs area.
Paul was diagnosed with HIV back in 1988.
I followed everything for the first probably 10 or 15 years. I followed everything very closely. I tried to get in as many trials as I could. I'm kind of a fighter. I never gave up.
Then, a few years ago, he was diagnosed with something unrelated to his HIV.
I was diagnosed with leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant.
Paul became a test case. Doctors chose a donor with a rare genetic mutation resistant to most HIV strains. After the transplant, Paul went into HIV remission. He's essentially cured.
It's approaching 5 years since the transplant and 3 years off of HIV meds. It still amazes me.
It also amazed Elina. She got to meet Paul on a trip to the National Institutes of Health in the United States.
I was really fascinated, and I asked him, what was the experience like to know that you are one of the people being cured?
Paul is one of 7 people who are in long-term remission for HIV. He told Elina that he is humbled to be one of the 7 and that it is a privilege.
And I also told him about my experiences, and I think my talk with him also went personal because he motivated me to keep doing the work that I do, and that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of finding cure. But I think by end of the day, he also talked about also supporting and celebrating the existing gains that we have right now. We're working towards a universal cure that would be easier for everybody to access. In books, it was written, HIV has no cure, it cannot be cured. And that has been there for a long time. But actually to know that there's people that have been cured, not only 1, 2, 3, and now we're talking about the 7th cure. It gives hope, meaning that we are going towards something. And actually, at times when people are saying that, you think that it's a lie. But when you see them in person and you're like, this is real.
I realize the responsibility I have to kind of, serve as an ambassador of hope for people living with HIV and for their researchers. So it's very inspiring to me to meet all of them, and they're very happy to meet me.
Elina now engages with HIV on all levels, starting with the individual, to the community, to the national, to the continental, and to the global.
So I lead an organization called the National Association for Young People Living with HIV. And it's been really exciting working with young people living with HIV and now extending to HIV cure, which is a new area in Malawi. I know a lot of countries have been talking about HIV cure for so long, but it's really kind of new in my country. Yeah. I'm also part of the Cure Row program under AVEC and also under PEV. So I've been engaged a lot in the HIV cure through those spaces.
AVAC is the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, and PEV is a collaboratory for pediatric adolescent virus elimination. Elina and other community stakeholders around the world meet with scientists to learn about advances in research. This way they can bring their perspective to clinical trials, and they can also convey vital information about research progress to their communities and to leaders in their countries.
I'm studying a lot on low-level ground in bringing the concept of cure for communities in Malawi, because in Malawi, we are not talking about cure. And in meetings, when I mention about HIV cure research, people look at me weirdly, like, what are you talking about? That doesn't exist. So actually, I'm advocating to form a consortium, the first ever consortium for HIV cure in Malawi. And that is very much focusing on engagement of the communities at all levels, engaging them in the research as well as just in general policy making and as well as global discussions.
Elina points out that all of the 7 patients who have been essentially cured of HIV live in Europe and the United States. And yet today, 1 million people in Malawi are living with HIV, about 7% of the population. In contrast, less than 0.5% of Americans are living with HIV.
I think it would be important to make sure that countries like Malawi that have got the highest burden also get an opportunity to that research and be empowered. So it's about us also demanding for equity in all areas, including HIV cure research.
Since someone can live a long life on antiretroviral drugs, why is a cure so important?
I think with treatment, we all know that it's not permanent. At the end of the day, we realize that ARVs and the solutions, yes, they are helping, but they're still temporary. And at the same time, we're also looking at the impacts of ARVs.
As people living with HIV age, it is becoming more and more apparent that the daily doses take a toll on the body. Paul certainly notices the difference now that he's not taking ARVs.
Since being off of the HIV meds, I've seen a big difference. My labs have really improved, like all my kidney function, liver functions, all those things got much better. And that has to be from being off the meds,
And then there's the economic burden of HIV.
Last year, I was involved in the global fund writing team. That's where we're looking for resources for HIV commodities. Every day, we still worried about the amount of funding that is coming towards HIV. So you think of, if we don't have enough funding, what happens? Are we going to manage to procure and have everyone access ARVs? We need a cure to make sure that HIV is done with.
And Elina adds that while a cure is the end goal, Malawi needs to be included in other advancements along the way.
I've got a friend in Canada who gets injection every 3 months. That injectable, it is available. Countries have been using it for a while. How do we actually advocate at a global level to ensure that is also a benefit? Africa is not really benefiting enough.
Elina believes that one day she too will benefit from cure research, maybe even achieve total remission.
I've got full hope when I met Paul Edmonds, and to know that he was living with HIV, he's been cured. It doesn't matter what kind of method that is, he's been cured of the virus. That gives hopes that we are moving towards something great.
Ultimately, Elina envisions a world beyond HIV.
It is very important because I understand what it means to live with HIV, the impacts and the pains, and by the end of the day, we really want to create a generation that doesn't go through the same things that we've gone through. We are managing to have children being born HIV negative, but then we don't want to lose those children when they're already born negative and they get infected later. So working so much to create a world where it's free, a world where they don't feel the same pains, and just making sure that I'm part and parcel or contributing to that, because I would know that I was part of a greater thing.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Find out more about Elina at petaids.org. Many thanks to associate producer Madeline Morris. We had editing help from Dan Bobkoff from Rhyme Media. I'm Eric Bond. Keep listening for more episodes of Beyond. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Talk to you next time.